I can say that after this experience, I learned one thing about going into the woods at night. Don't. We were all 14 years old, and when I say we, I mean my group of friends and I. We were all really close, and we even considered each other as family. This experience happened to us on Jen's birthday, in a massive forested area, under which lies a small beach. It's a strange phenomenon, having a beach next to a forest. This park stretched about 4 to 5 miles, and that is what made our encounter even more terrifying. So, it was Jen's birthday, and we all went to her house, and after the pizza, gift exchange, and a video game playing, we all got restless and wanted to do something fun before dark. Collectively, we decided to go to that forested park. It was about a 15-minute drive from her house, and Jennifer's mum dropped us off and told us to call her or text her when we were done. We all lived relatively close to each other in a relatively safe neighborhood, little to no crime whatsoever. We had a somewhat weak cell service when we arrived at the park. After being dropped off, we messed around for a little bit, walking around in the clear unforested side of the park. I looked at my watch after what I assumed to be an hour after Jen's mum left. It was about 6:30, and where I live, the sun sets extremely fast, especially around autumn and winter. It was October at the time. We saw the sun starting to set, and we decided to stay for a couple of minutes more. Out of nowhere, Damien, one of the guys with us, tells us, and I quote, "I need to take a leak. Don't go into the forest until I come out, otherwise I'll use your jackets as toilet paper." He half jogged off into the woods, giving us a sheepish smile. We waited and waited and waited for him to come out. It was getting pretty dark pretty fast, and Lucy was the first to openly freak out to the group. We debated a little bit, and after calling him several times, we realized that his phone, it must have died, or he was out of reception or something. Typical cliche horror movie stuff, I know. Shit hit the fan when we decided that we were going to go in the woods and look for him. Against our better judgment, we wandered into the woods. Immediately, our vision was obscured by the never-ending sea of darkness. We walked around, calling his name loudly. That was our first major mistake. We still aren't taking things too seriously, since we think that he's just fucking around with us. But it's completely dark now, despite our eyes being adjusted to the darkness too. We walked and yelled for about 10 minutes when we realized that something was really wrong. In fact, we were so involved in finding our friend that we didn't realize that we were completely lost ourselves. Utterly lost. We wandered around aimlessly for a long time. Stacy started crying and freaking out, which really broke it to us that this was getting pretty serious. We decided to push on though to try and find our way out. I am majorly freaking out at this point when all the hairs on my neck stand up. I get that awful feeling like I'm being watched. I know the feeling of being watched has its believers and haters, but I can say for a fact that it really is something real. It's like a spider crawling slowly and methodically up your neck, purposely trying to bother you, but every time you swat at it, it moves somewhere else. I scanned the bushes and trees, blindly, trying to figure out the source of my anxiety, when I see a man trying to conceal himself in the woods. A fucking man. He smiles and motions for me to be quiet. He also had one hand behind his back. Obviously, a major red flag. My get the hell out of here meter is through the roof at this point. I acted like nothing happened though, waiting to distance ourselves from him, Then I silently freaked out to the rest of my friends. Jen just looks at me, dumbstruck, when we hear rapid footsteps coming our way. Lucy screams and we all hauled ass straight out of there. We ran like our asses were on fire. In fact, when the adrenaline rush finally hit, we probably ran faster than Usain Bolt. I'm actually a national level champion cross-country runner, and I ran until my legs ached for air. I ran until I started tasting blood, in fact. You may not understand unless you've been in a situation like this, but you can only exert this amount of energy out of sheer will to live. Losing him wasn't easy, but we made it out to the beach and ran about halfway across, and nearly at the water. Damien finally turned up and vomited into the water, and the rest of us just stared at him, his eyes telling me something that I'll never forget. It was a look of pure joy, like his dead dog just came back to life or something. Through his heavy breathing, Damien managed to explain what happened, and I kid you not, all of the hairs on his arm stood up. Another guy in the group told us a similar story, that he saw the man, ran and couldn't make his way back to tell us to get out. We were all just happy to be alive at this point, to be honest with you, despite our deep cuts and bleeding faces from running through those trees for so long. I called Jen's mum, and when we got into the car, we told her everything. She practically turned white and grabbed her phone and called the police. She asked them to search the forest where we were. Jen's mum, bless her soul, bought each of us a Happy Meal after that. A few days later, we heard back from Jen's mum that the police, they found nothing but a smelly and ripped shirt. This experience has never left us, ever. Now that we've all graduated, we still hang out together and wonder, who was that man? What would have happened if I hadn't have seen him? And most importantly, what was he holding behind his back? The town I grew up in had an old sanitarium. It closed down in the late 60s, but the building, it was still there. In high school, everyone and their mum tried breaking in. Some succeeded, but others just chickened out. After high school and a stint in the Marines, I found myself working private security, and what we mostly did was guard construction projects at night. Well, the sanitarium was slated for demo, and the company that bought the land planned on turning it into an apartment complex. So, myself and a guy who had been pushing 70, named Fred, we were working one night. Fred was a former cop from Chicago, and before that, I was obviously a Marine. We often swapped stories, and we really enjoyed working together. The sanitarium was a hotbed for homeless and drug activity, and so we often had to chase tweakers or homeless folks off the property. That night, Fred and I, we were shooting the shit when he stops me and tells me that someone just went over the fence. So, we get out and head inside. Now, it's important to note, Fred was unarmed and all I had was my side piece. We also had some pepper spray and a stun gun, and a baton, but nothing else much. So, we're headed after this guy who was wearing all black, and wasn't responding to our commands to stop. We hear glass breaking, and realize that this guy must have broke into one of the old administrative offices. We have keys to the door, but the locks are old, and it takes us a few minutes to get in. Our protocol was to call dispatch to advise them of a foot chase, so Fred did that as I swept the rooms with my flashlight and gun. I'm calling out to this dude, and then I hear an evil cackle. It sent a jolt of dread throughout my body, and Fred, next to me, turned white. I start pleading with this guy to show himself, telling him the company called the police, which, at this point, they actually hadn't. But just now, the laughing is coming from behind us, and it's not one voice. It sounds like several voices. Fred literally pisses himself. He's that terrified. And, I mean, this is a Vietnam veteran and a former cop. Fred and I turn to leave, and I hear what sounds like footsteps, and then the unmistakable sound of a gun cocking. I grab Fred, and we just run for it, and as we do, there's more maniacal laughing. The cops finally do show up because dispatch couldn't reach us and called it in. They go in and they find 3 guys in there. All 3 of them were armed. One with a gun, one with a homemade shiv, and the other with a lead pipe. If we hadn't have run, who knows what could have happened that night. And this takes place in October 1977. When my mum was 16, she ran away from her abusive home along with her friend Lisa. They hitchhiked from Mass all the way to California. Obviously, this wasn't the brightest of plans, but given my mum's tumultuous home life and past experiences, she didn't see how it could be much more dangerous than anything she'd already experienced. They had a pretty safe and uneventful trip across the country, finding friends and many truck drivers and other travelers. It wasn't until they reached California when this encounter happens. So, my mum and Lisa end up meeting these 2 guys who were super nice to them. They crashed at their place for a few days, partying and all that. But nothing bad had come of it at this point. These guys tell the girls that they're going to take them to Hollywood Hills and Sunset Boulevard to see the sights. Not being from the area, my mum had no idea that these areas were more crime-ridden at that time, especially considering that they were supposed to be sightseeing. My mum, she just really wanted to see where all the movie stars lived. These guys take my mum and her friend to some delivery restaurant bar and get them super drunk. It's also the first time that my mum is introduced to and tries illicit substances. After these underage girls are now completely high and drunk, they split off in pairs and my mum's friend disappears with one of these guys. My mum is now hanging out with just one of her new guy friends, and he then suggests that they stand on the sidewalk on Sunset Boulevard, in the middle of the night, mind you, and if and when a car pulls up, she should get in and direct the driver to drive across the street to this dark parking lot. It isn't really until the first and only car pulls up, and she gets in, that she's realized this guy is prostituting her out. Keep in mind, these guys had been nothing but kind and respectful to my young mum and friend for the past 2 days. Also, and very sadly, this type of abuse it's not a new concept for her either. So, she gets into this car, and instead of pulling into the parking lot, he keeps driving straight. My mum explains that he's gone the wrong way, so he starts driving faster. My mum moves towards the door, but he locks it, hits her, and attempts to hold her down all at the same time. He tells her that she isn't going anywhere. My mum knew in her head that she needed to get out of that car, or she'd be dead. So, in one swift move, she unlocks the door, and then tucks and rolls out of the car. His car comes screeching to a halt. She sees some bushes in front of a house, so she runs to hide behind them. He's turned around looking for her, creeping along. His passenger side was facing where she was hiding, and she was peeking through the bushes. And she saw that he had a gun. As soon as his car crept by, she ran to the backyard. It was all fenced in though. There was no other way out, so she had to go back the way she came. By the time she crawled back into the bushes to see if he was still around, she saw that his car had gone to the end of the road and turned back around. So he passes again, and when she thought that he was far enough away, she crawled out of the bushes to run. But then she sees his brake lights. Confident that he's now seen her, she runs as fast as possible around a corner, but she could also hear his car getting closer, so she had to duck and hide behind parked cars on the road and stuff. As soon as he passes again, she booked it across the street, which took her through the parking lot that she was originally supposed to park in, and back to her friend. The creep did circle back again, but by then, she was with her friend and they were leaving the area. My mum and her friend quickly ditched these two assholes and did find a safer place to stay. But only a short time later did my mum call home and eventually made it home safely. It wasn't until a long time later that she saw in the news a story about a woman being murdered and recognized the murder, dubbed the Hillside Strangler, as the man who had picked her up that night. On a side note, my mum literally just dictated this story to me to share with you guys. I've heard it before, but not in so much detail. I told her about this place and she said that I should share a story. Not purposefully, but I googled an image of the Hillside Strangler and accidentally showed her. And unexpectedly, my Fern and her jumped really high. It actually really unnerved her, recognizing him again. I feel bad about that.
G'day mates, it's Busta here. Well, I hope you enjoyed the video, guys. And you know, that story about the cop and the Marine, it reminds me of this time that one of my friends, who was a private eye, he told me about an alligator who used to dress up in a suit, vest, tie and everything, joined his team. Yeah, no joke. He was a real investigator. Oh man, I know I'm gonna get some hate in the comments section for that one. You only got yourselves to blame, guys. You guys wanted this. Oh man, that was so bad. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this week's video. And as always, it would be great if you guys could share, like, and comment. And if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe and check out my other videos too. Thanks again for watching and tuning in every week, guys. I appreciate you guys so much. And I'll see you mates in the next one.